We still have things to do, which is what I wish to discuss with you this morning. No satisfaction, modesty, judging by our results. That's the approach of our Commission as we look at our agenda over the coming months. Sometimes history, in the true sense of the word, thrusts itself into the life of nations without any prior warning. That's what happened at the time of World War I. In 1914, it caught the continent off guard. It was a sunny, calm, optimistic year in 1913. In 1913, Europeans were expecting to live through a lasting peace, and yet a fratricidal war descended on Europe the next year. I'm referring to that period not just because, or rather not because I'm suggesting that we're on the verge of a similar catastrophe in Europe. The European Union is a guarantee of peace. Let's be happy that we live on a continent of peace, a continent which enjoys peace thanks to the European Union. And so let us show more respect to the European Union. Let us not sully its image. Let us defend our way of life, our way of being. Let's embrace a type of patriotism that's not directed against others. And let us decry knee-jerk nationalism which attacks others and seeks scapegoats rather than looking for solutions which will allow us to coexist better.
Le pacte fondateur de l'Union européenne.
The founding principle of the Union, no more war, never again. This informs our lives and those of everyone around us. What is the state of the Union today, in 2018? Europe has very much got past the economic and financial crisis, which hit us coming from elsewhere and had a very brutal impact on us. Europe, as said by the Lehman Brothers, we've had nearly 12 million jobs created since 2014. The economy is growing. That's more than the number of people living in Belgium. Never have we had so many people, 239 million men and women, at work in Europe. Youth unemployment stands at 14.8%. That figure is still too high, but it's the lowest level since 2000. Investment has come back to Europe, thanks in particular to the European Fund for Strategic Investment, which some, fewer and fewer, are calling the Juncker Plan. That has generated 235 billion worth of public and private investment, and we're on target for 400 billion worth. And then in Greece, after years which, it must be said, were painful years, following unprecedented social problems, Greece has made a success of its programme and is back on its feet. I pay homage once again to the Herculean efforts of the Greek people, an effort that others in Europe have still not acknowledged sufficiently. I have always, as you know, defended Greece, its dignity, its role in Europe, and in particular its continued membership of the Eurozone, and I'm still proud of that. Europe has also reasserted its trade position. It's a global trade power. This is proof, if ever there was, of the need to pool sovereignty. The European Union today has trade agreements with 70 countries. Taken together, we account for 40% of world GDP. The trade agreements I'm talking about have very often been called into question, wrongly. They enable us to export high European food safety standards around the world, as well as workers' rights, environmental standards, and consumer law standards. When last July, during a dangerous period of international tension, I visited both Beijing and Tokyo as well as Washington in 1 week, I was able to speak in my capacity as President of the Commission on behalf of the largest single market in the world, on behalf of a union which accounts for a fifth of the total world economy, a union which is prepared to defend its values and its interests. I represented Europe as an open continent, but not one that we will hand over. I was able to set out our position in detail and in principle, and I was able to achieve palpable results for our citizens and our firms. When we are united, we Europeans, as a union, have become a force to be reckoned with that you cannot do without. Some in Europe were unhappy with the agreement I reached with President Trump. Some were surprised by it, but there shouldn't have been a surprise. Whenever Europe speaks as one, we can impose our position on others. Where necessary, Europe must act as one. We demonstrated this with our ceaseless efforts to defend the Paris Climate Agreement. We, as Europeans, want to leave a cleaner planet to coming generations. I agree with our Energy Commissioner's analysis of the CO2 emission cuts for 2030. They're scientifically right and politically necessary. The terrible events of this summer have brought home, not just to farmers, the importance of our efforts to safeguard the future for coming generations. Now, of course, you may choose to ignore the climate challenge and look the other way. We in the Commission and you in Parliament must look towards the future. Ladies and gentlemen, the clock is still ticking. The world is ever more volatile. The challenges before our continent are growing day after day, and so we cannot ease up in our efforts, even for 1 second, as we seek to build a more united and stronger Europe. Europe can export its stability, as we did with our successive enlargements. As far as I'm concerned, those enlargements have been and remain success stories because we've managed to bring together European geography and history. But efforts still remain to be made. We need a forthright definition of our attitude towards the accession of Western Balkan countries. Otherwise, others will take it upon themselves to shape our immediate neighbourhood. Let us look around us and see what's happening at this time in Syria, In Idlib, the course of events should be a source of great immediate concern to us all. We cannot remain silent in the face of an impending humanitarian disaster, which is a disaster foretold. The Syrian conflict shows us how the international order, which Europeans have taken advantage of since World War II, has increasingly been called into question. Furthermore, in today's world, Europe can no longer rest assured that the commitments entered into in the past will still be respected in the future. Yesterday's alliances may no longer be tomorrow's alliances. As I was saying, today's world needs a strong, united Europe. A Europe working for peace, trade agreements, stable monetary arrangements, even if others elsewhere are all too inclined to resort to commercial or monetary warfare. I don't like multilateralism which acts with no regard for others' interests. I remain a convinced multilateralist. If Europe better realizes its political power, its economic power, and sometimes it's the military power of its competitor nations, we will no longer have to be the global payer alone, although we are still willing to pay.
But we have to be global players too. C'est la raison pour laquelle, en dépit d'une forte résistance,
that's why, despite strong resistance at the time, as of 2014, I relaunched the European Defence Union. That's why, in the coming months, the Commission will continue its work on the European Defence Fund and permanent structured cooperation in defence to make them fully operational. I should add a point of detail which I think is rather important in this context. We will not be militarizing the European Union. What we're seeking is greater responsibility and independence, because only a strong, united Europe will be in a position to defend our citizens from internal and external threats, be it terrorism or climate change. Only a strong, united Europe can save jobs in an open, interconnected world. Only a strong, united Europe will make it possible for us to rise to the challenge of global digitalization. We Europeans, because we are the largest market in the world, will be able to set standards, data, climate standards, while upholding our citizens' conditions of life, provided we are united. A strong, united Europe will allow its member states to reach for the stars. Thanks to our Galileo program, Europe is still in the space race. No single member state would have been able to launch the satellites that 400 million users around the world are already benefiting from. No member state could have done it on its own. Galileo is a success story. Primarily a European success story. Without Europe, there would be no Galileo. Let's be proud of that. President, geopolitics tells us that the bell is sounding for Europe's sovereignty. Europe has to embrace its destiny. Europe has a capacity to influence world affairs. Europe must increasingly be a sovereign player in international relations.
La souveraineté européenne
European sovereignty derives from the national sovereignty of our member states. It does not replace what properly lies within the national purview. By pooling sovereignty where necessary, we strengthen all our component nations and regions. That's part and parcel of belonging to the European Union. European sovereignty will never be directed against others. Europe must remain a tolerant, open continent and will remain so. Europe will never become a fortress turning its back on the world, in particular the suffering part of the world. Europe must and will remain a multilateral continent because the world belongs to everyone, not just the few.
Tel est aussi l'enjeu des élections au Parlement européen.
And that's what's at stake in the European elections in May 2019. In the 250 days between now and then, we must get across to our citizens the evidence that when we act together, the European Union can achieve results, and it respects the commitments we entered into at the beginning of our period of office. Between now and the European elections, we must show that Europe is able to overcome differences between the North and the South, the East and the West. The European Union, Europe, is too small to split itself into 2 today and 4 tomorrow. We have to show clearly that together, East, West, South and North, we're able to plant the seeds of a more sovereign Europe.
President, distinguished members, in May 2019, there will be elections. The citizens of Europe won't be interested in what the Commission is proposing, but it will interest them that companies pay their taxes where they make their profits. Voters want a lot from you, not all of you. I know the voters want to know that the Commission proposal will rapidly become a reality. Those who want that are right. If Europeans in 2019, if they won't be they'll be interested in what the Commission does on plastics. If the Europeans, if we want to convince them, we need a European law which cements the ban on plastics. We all declare in fine speeches that we want to be more ambitious in big issues and less ambitious in smaller things. In May 2019, the Europeans won't applaud if twice a year we have to continue to change the clocks twice a year. We need to change this business of changing the clocks. The member states, based on subsidiarity, should decide whether their citizens should live in summer or winter time. We expect that Council and Parliament say this in the same way, and will make sure that regional single market conform solutions will be found. Time is pressing. In the months ahead, we should work closer together so what we promised in 2014 can be delivered in good time before the European elections. When we started We all promised to deliver an innovative digital single market, a better monetary union, a banking union, a fair single market, an energy policy, a comprehensive migration policy, a union of safety and security. At least most of us undertook that the social dimension of Europe shouldn't be in second place. It should be treated more seriously. The Commission, all the initiatives that we announced in the Commission in 2014 were put on the table. Half of them were already adopted by Council and Parliament. 20% are well advanced, and 30% are stuck in some difficult negotiations. I don't accept that the Commission is responsible for all the faults itself. Of course, there have been shortcomings. Our proposals are well known. In particular, when it comes to refugees and migration, they should be adopted and implemented. I won't allow in future, I know this will happen, that the Commission is made the sole scapegoat. Scapegoats exist in all institutions, the least of them in the Commission and the Parliament. Leadership on a broad front is needed. This goes to changing our security union. The Europeans expect, quite rightly, that the European Union protects them. So the Commission is proposing new rules today to counter terrorist propaganda and to take it down from the internet within an hour. 1 hour is the decisive time window when the greatest damage can take place. We're also proposing that the tasks of the new European public prosecutor will be extended when it comes to fighting terrorist acts. We must be able to prosecute terrorists across borders. Terrorists don't know any borders. We shouldn't, by not cooperating, we shouldn't make us their accomplices. So we're proposing new measures today so that we effectively and we can act on money laundering in a cross-border manner. We must be equally decisive to make sure there are free and fair elections in Europe. The Commission is proposing new rules to protect electoral processes against manipulation by third countries and huge private interests. Leadership seeking compromises are urgently needed in migration issues. We've made progress, more than is claimed. 5 out of the 7 Commission proposals to reshape our migration system were adopted. Our efforts have been successful. There are 97% less migrants less in the eastern Mediterranean and 80% less in the central Mediterranean route. Since 2015, over 690,000 people have been saved. But the member states haven't yet the right proportion between responsibility for their own sovereignty and the necessary solidarity amongst themselves. This solidarity must be provided by the member states if they want to retain the Schengen area without internal borders. I am and remain against internal borders. Where they now exist, they must be removed, because if they remain, there will be an unacceptable backward step in Europe. The Commission and many Council presidencies have made numerous proposals on migration. I call on the Austrian Council presidency, and they will do this, to make decisive steps so that we have proper solutions for a balanced reform of migration. We can't, when every new ship, we can't be talking every time about ad hoc solutions for the people on board. Ad hoc solutions are not adequate. We need a lot more. We need more solidarity, and solidarity must be lasting and it must be organized. We also need more solidarity because we need more efficiency. This also applies when it comes to disaster protection. If there are fires somewhere, there are fires everywhere in Europe. This summer we didn't just have the fires, which were pictures we saw, but the Polish firefighters who helped out in Sweden. Back to migration. We're putting forward a proposal today to strengthen the European border and coast guard. External borders must be protected more effectively, so we're proposing that the number of border agencies from the finance from the European budget by 2020 will be 10,000. We're making a proposal to extend the European Refugee Agency. They need support when it comes to processing asylum applications in line with the Geneva Convention. We're making a proposal for the return of illegal migrants. I repeat my wish in Parliament, which is a call to open legal routes for migration into Europe. We need qualified migrants. The Commission proposals on this have been on the table for some time, so please implement them.
President, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to talk about the future as well. And we therefore must speak of Africa, Europe's twin continent. By 2050, Africa's population will number 2.5 billion. 1 in 4 people on Earth will be African. We need to invest more in our relationship with the nations of this great and noble continent. And we have to stop seeing the Africa-EU relationship through the sole prism of development aid. Such an approach is inadequate and is humiliating for Africa. Africa does not need charity. It needs a true and balanced partnership. And Europe needs this partnership just as much. In preparing my speech today, I spoke with my African friends, notably Paul Kagame, the chairperson of the African Union, and we agreed that donor-recipient relations are a thing of the past, and we agreed that reciprocal commitments are the way forward. We want to build a new partnership with Africa.
La Commission propose aujourd'hui.
Today, we are proposing a new alliance between Europe and Africa, an alliance for investment and sustainable jobs. This alliance, as we see it, would help create up to 10 million jobs in Africa over the next 5 years. And we want to create a framework that brings more investment to Africa. And we are not starting from scratch. Our external investment plan, which was launched 2 years ago, will mobilise over €44 billion in both the public and private sectors. The projects which are in the pipeline will be to the tune of €24 billion. We want to focus our investment where our actions make a real difference. By 2020, the EU will have supported 35,000 African students and researchers through the Erasmus programme. By 2027, this figure should reach 105,000. Trade between Africa and Europe is important, is significant. 36% of Africa's trade is with the European Union. But trade between us is not enough. I'm convinced that we also have to make progress on other agreements and have a continent-to-continent economic partnership between equal partners and move towards a free trade agreement.
Another issue where I see a strong need for the Union for leadership is Brexit. I will not enter into the details of the negotiations, which are being masterfully ended by my friend Michel Barnier. He works on the basis of a unanimous position confirmed time and again by the 27 member states. However, allow me to recall 3 principles which should guide our work on Brexit in the months to come. First of all, we respect, of course, the British decision to leave our union. Yeah. But we regret it deeply, as you are. But we also ask the British government to understand that someone who leaves the union cannot be in the same privileged position as a member state. If you leave the union, you are, of course, no longer part of our single market, and certainly not only in parts of it. Secondly, the European Commission, this Parliament, and all other member states will always show loyalty and solidarity with Ireland when it comes to the Irish border. This is why we want to find a creative solution that prevents a hard border in Northern Ireland. And we will defend all the elements of the Good Friday Agreement. It is Brexit that is making the border more visible in Northern Ireland. It's not the European Union. Thirdly, after the 29th of March 2019, the United Kingdom will never be an ordinary third country for us. The United Kingdom will always be a very close neighbour and partner in political, economic and security terms. In the past months, when we needed unity in the Union, Britain was at our side, driven by the same values and principles of all other Europeans. This is why I welcome Prime Minister May's proposal to develop an ambitious new partnership for the future after Brexit. We agree with the statement made in Chequers that the starting point for such a partnership should be a free trade area between the United Kingdom and the European Union. On the basis of these principles, the Commission's negotiators, mainly my good friend Michel Barnier, stand ready to work day and night to reach a deal. We owe it to our citizens and our businesses to ensure the United Kingdom's withdrawal is orderly and that there is stability afterwards. It will not be the Commission that will stand in the way of this. Mesdames et Messieurs les députés,
ladies and gentlemen, members, between now and the European elections, and between now and the summit that will take place on the 9th of May of next year in Romania, a lot of work remains to be done. And we'll have to convince our citizens that we share the same purpose of our European Union. In Sibiu, we need to make sure that we get things right. People want certainty. They expect a clear message and don't want half measures to be taken. So let's not give them those then. And this is all part of the European agenda en route to Sibiu. In Sibiu, we'll have to ratify the partnership agreement between the EU and Japan, and we'll have to enter into that agreement for economic reasons, but also for geopolitical meetings. Between now and Sibiu, we'll have to organise an agreement on principle for the post-2020 EU budget. And we need to give young Europeans an opportunity to make the most of what the Erasmus programme has to offer, and we need to make sure that enough money is available for it, and we'll have to decide on that matter as we will have to decide on other matters. And if we want to give our researchers and startups more opportunities and prevent funding gaps costing jobs, we will have to decide on the budget before the elections. Now, without militarising the European Union, if we want to increase defence spending by a factor of 20, again, we will have to decide on this before the elections. If we want to increase our investment in Africa by 23%, again, we must decide quickly. Heads of state, ministers, MEPs, national members of parliament, we always hear that we can't decide on these matters before the elections because that would lead to a democratic crisis. I say no. It's normal in a democracy to have elections, and it's also normal to take certain decisions before those elections. By next year, we will also have to develop the international role of the euro, which has now existed for 20 years. And this, in spite of the criticism that has been levelled at it, the euro has been successful. It's the second global currency after the dollar. 60 countries, in one way or another, have pegged their currency to the euro. But we need to do more to make sure that our single currency can play its full role on the international scene. And recent developments have highlighted the need to deepen our monetary union, and the Commission has a lot of proposals that it wants to adopt. We must and will go further. It's an aberration to have $3 billion worth of energy imports a year. That's 80%. When only a small part of that comes from the United States, and it's an aberration to see that European companies are buying European planes in dollars and not in euro, and that's something we will have to change as well.
C'est la raison pour laquelle
This is why the Commission, before the end of the year, will present initiatives to strengthen the international role of the euro. The euro must become the active instrument of a new and more sovereign Europe. We must, of course, first put our own house in order by strengthening our economic and monetary union, which is what we have already started to do. Without a strengthened economic and monetary union, we won't be able to achieve this. We have to complete our economic and monetary union so that the euro can become stronger. And still on the road to Sibiu, I would like to make a tangible progress when it comes to strengthening our foreign policy. We need to improve our ability to speak with one voice when it comes to foreign policy. It is not right that our union silenced itself at the United Nations Human Rights Council when it came to condemning human rights abuses by China, and this because one member state opposed it. That is just one amongst many examples I could give you. And that's the reason why the Commission, again, would propose to you that qualified majority voting is used on matters of foreign policy. I would repeat the message that I set out in detail last year, and we will be putting forward a number of proposals so that in certain areas, not all areas of foreign policy, we can move towards qualified majority voting. The treaty as it stands allows the EU to take a decision on this basis, and I think the time has now come to use this lost treasure of the Lisbon Treaty, and I think we should be able to decide on certain matters by a qualified majority. And I also think that in relation to certain tax matters, we should be able to decide by qualified majority.
Un mot, Monsieur le Président, pour dire que d'autres façons.
Mr. President, we have disagreements between governments and between institutions. Increasingly, there are disagreements. Heated exchanges amongst governments and institutions are becoming more and more common. But the tone is not only worrying when it comes to political discourse, but it is also true of the way some seek to shut down debate altogether by targeting media and journalists. Europe must always be a place where freedom of press is possible and is not called into question. Too many of our journalists are intimidated, attacked, or even murdered.
Il n'y a pas de démocratie.
We cannot have democracy without free press.
Merci d'applaudir, comme ça je peux boire.
Thank you for your applause. That gives me an opportunity to drink.
En général, try again. D'une façon générale,
in general, ladies and gentlemen, we must revive the lost art of compromise. Compromise does not mean a weakness or a sacrificing of our convictions. And the Commission will resist any attack on the rule of law, and we continue to be very concerned by the developments in some of our member states. Article 7 must be applied whenever the rule of law is threatened.
À cet égard, le Premier vice-président
First Vice President Timmermans is doing a remarkable job of defending the rule of law, but all too often he stands alone in defending the rule of law. And the whole Commission and I personally support him fully.
Et puis, il y a un point sur lequel
And then there is one point on which we have to be very clear. That is the judgments from the Court of Justice, which must be respected and implemented. The European Union is a community of law, and respecting the rule of law and abiding by court decisions are not an option, but an obligation. Mr. President, honourable members of the European Parliament, friends, I started this speech, it won't be my last speech, but it's my last State of the Union address, by talking about history, which in a small way covers our mandate and, of course, in a wider sense, covers our time here. And we are all responsible for the Europe of today, and we must all take responsibility for the Europe of tomorrow. Such is history. Parliaments and commissions come and go. Europe is here to stay. But for Europe to become what it must, there are several lessons to be learned. Europe can no longer be a spectator or a mere commentator of international events. Europe must be an active player and must become an architect of tomorrow's world. There is a strong demand for Europe throughout the world, and to meet such high demand, Europe will have to speak with one voice on the world stage. And amongst nations, Europe's voice must be heard clearly. Federica Mogherini has made Europe's diplomacy more coherent. It's more coherent than it's ever been. But let us not slide back into the incoherence of competing and parallel national diplomacies. Europe's diplomacy must be conducted in the singular. And from now on in, I would like us to make more efforts to bring together the East and West of Europe. It is time we put an end to the sorry spectacle of a divided Europe. Our continent and those who brought an end to the Cold War deserve better. I would like the European Union to take better care of its social dimension too. Those who ignore the legitimate concerns of workers and small businesses are putting our society at risk, and it is time that we proclaimed the Gothenburg Social Summit into law. I would like for next year's elections to be a landmark for European democracy. I would like to see the Spitzenkandidaten process repeated, which is a small step forward for European democracy. For me, this process will be made more credible once we have transnational lists, and I hope that that will be in place for the elections in 2024. But above all, I would like us to say no to unhealthy nationalism and to say yes to enlightened patriotism. We should never forget that the patriotism of the 21st century is twofold, both European and national, and they are not mutually exclusive. As the French philosopher Blaise Pascal said, I like things that go together. In order to stand on its own 2 feet, Europe and its nations must move forward as one. To love Europe is to love its nations. To love your nation is to love Europe. Patriotism is a virtue. Unchecked nationalism is both riddled with poison and deceit.
En un mot, restons fidèles.
In short, we must remain true to ourselves. The trees we plant today must provide shade for our great-grandchildren, whether they come from the east or the west, the south or the north, to give them all they need to grow and breathe easily. A few years ago, standing in this very same spot, I told you that Europe was the love of my life. I love Europe still and shall do so forever. Thank you for your attention.